Good afternoon and happy Valentine's Day. I knew that this morning when I started out, but obviously got a lot of cards here earlier today. And I know there's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of passion, some organized activities here in the Capitol and other places around the state. That's certainly something that's great about living in Wisconsin and great about living in America, where we can have those sorts of discussions. A lot of passion out there, but I appreciate the fact that at least through today, and I would expect through the rest of the week, that everyone has a right to have their passion, their voices be heard. It seems to be pretty peaceful and directive, and we certainly appreciate that and appreciate that continuing throughout the week. It's interesting thinking about this because while there is a lot of passion, I've noticed along the way a fair amount of the comments and information we've received from activities over the weekend, again today, and some of those planned in the coming days, while they're certainly focused on that passion, a fair amount of it also involves some misinformation. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about what the facts are. Clearly, in what we announced in this budget repair bill, which the legislature will be holding public hearings on this week and potentially acting on by the end of the week, very much involved the opportunity for us to balance the budget and to make a fundamental choice. The choice being, do we make the decision to make changes that involve modest changes in what we ask of public employees when it comes to pension and health care contributions, or do we run the risk of thousands upon thousands of local and state government employees being laid off to the end of this fiscal year and most definitely into the next biennial budget? To me, it's all about jobs. I don't want anybody laid off, be they in the public sector or the private sector. And I think if I have to choose between 5,500 or more state government employees and equal or larger amount of local government employees and teachers and others being laid off versus making very modest contribution changes for pension and health care, I'm going to choose those changes. What we're asking for from state government employees is a 5.8% contribution to the pension system. That's essentially at the national average for those that have pensions. And what we're asking for in terms of the health care premium contribution is just over 12.5%, which again is half of the national average. I think when I talk to people over the weekend outside of government, the response I've gotten from most folks is, where do I sign up for a deal like that? I mean, to go from paying next to nothing to paying a relatively minimal amount, particularly when it comes to the health care premium, a basic family plan at the lowest level in terms of cost, still means paying essentially less than $100 a month versus many of the folks I've talked to, including my brother, who pointed out this weekend he and his wife both work, middle-class family, 2 kids. They're paying more than $700 a month when it comes to health care and their 401k. In terms of protecting the middle class in the state, making modest contributions which apply to me, to my cabinet, to the legislature, as well as to all state government employees, and will be similarly applied to local government employees. I think it is a realistic request. When you compare the rest of the middle class all across the state, is making much, much larger contributions, and in many cases over the past year, year and a half to 2 years have been making significant sacrifices in order to protect jobs at their respective employers. So for us, this is a reasonable request. It's also important to know, particularly in the days that come as we have more state employees come to the Capitol to express their voice on this issue, that state government employees, even with, and local government employees, even with these significant changes in terms of collective bargaining, will still maintain nearly all of the protections they have. Right now, Wisconsin has one of the strongest, if not the strongest, civil service protection system in the entire country. That is true for represented employees, but it also is true for non-represented employees. In fact, if you look at the state's history, long before collective bargaining was included in the state statutes, Wisconsin had one of the strongest systems in terms of civil service protection. What that means is we have a system in the state that says you have to be hired based on merit, and you can only be let go from employment based on just cause. Those are protections that are in the law. There may be many employees that, because of the fact that many collective bargaining agreements codify those standards, may confuse the fact that somehow they think that those are related to their collective bargaining contract with the union. They stay no matter what changes we make to collective bargain. And again, they're some of the strongest, if not the strongest in the country. On top of that, we're not making changes in terms of vacation days, time off, things of that nature. We're certainly maintaining those civil service protections in an area that many of us have heard about over the past year or two when it comes to frustration from state employees. We will not be adding in this budget repair bill, nor will my budget include any furlough days. The Doyle furloughs from the existing budget we're in continue through the end of this year, but the furloughs approved by the past administration and by the past legislative session are things that continue through the remainder of the remaining days of this budget, but they are not things that we are adding, which had the equivalent of about a 3% reduction in pay for our state employees. The other key element is because we're now no longer allowing the law, if these changes are approved that I proposed on Friday, the law no longer mandates membership in a union as part of the collective bargaining unit and will no longer deduct union dues from those employees' pay. Again, many cases $500, $600 or more in terms of savings that will go a long ways towards offsetting the cost of pension and health care contributions. So I think in total, while people obviously, I can understand the concern at any point having to pay more. I know in my own case, again, with people I've talked to in my cabinet, nobody's particularly eager to have to pay more, but I think as a counter, as an alternative to laying people up in these tough economic times, and as a counter with putting an even bigger burden when it comes to tax increases onto the middle class in the state, I think it's an incredibly positive alternative to what other choices we face. The last thing, and I heard a little bit of it today, but I expect I'll hear it in the days to come, there have been some, particularly at the local level, trying to tie this in when I was in Appleton on Friday, making a reference to kids and the impact that this budget repair bill has on kids. Unless someone can find me a kid who's paying for the pension or health care benefits in this state, this budget repair bill has no impact on children. Zero. It does not have an impact in terms of what the changes mean for local governments and school districts. This will have an impact on what teachers, as well as other local government and state government officials pay in terms of premiums for health care, in terms of pension. But actually, if you look at what's forthcoming in this next budget, what we're proposing as part of this budget repair bill is actually pro-kids. It's pro-student. In fact, it will ensure that more of those dollars that do go to local governments, and particularly that go to school districts from the state government and from the local taxpayer, actually go into the classroom, and they won't be eaten up through larger benefits. And so, again, the facts are pretty clear. People can certainly have every right to argue whether they think it's right or not to ask local government officials and state government officials to make higher premium and to make pension contributions. That's legitimate discussion. I think the majority of people in the public who pay far more than what we're talking about here certainly think it's a good idea and a reasonable, modest request, but by no means does it have a negative impact on our students or our children in this state. In fact, if anything, it's a net positive because it will allow local school districts the tools that school administrators and school board members have for years asked from the state government. They say, give us the tools and we can protect the programs we offer, we can protect the classroom, we can protect our curriculum. And so we're going to keep bringing the facts up. We think a calm debate about this. We certainly appreciate today's first day seeming to be pretty good spirits in terms of passion, but people being respectful of following the law, and we would imagine that would continue. And I would expect nothing less, because as I said repeatedly on Friday and said again over the weekend, state and local government employees are good, decent people. They're professionals who went into this profession because they love public service. We've seen that response overwhelmingly from many folks who said, whether they agreed or disagreed, they love their job, they love their work, and the more that we give them information about what the facts are and about understanding that, even after this passes, they're going to have every ability to continue to do their good job for the people of the state and of their communities, I think the more comfortable people are going to be with this change. With that, I'll take a few questions.
Governor, Senator Fitzgerald has been notably quiet about this. Does that worry you, and does it worry you about its chances in the Senate?
No, I think the bottom line, I put in calls to every Republican member of the state Senate this weekend and to obviously larger number in the Assembly, selected members of the state Assembly. The response I've got back, obviously a few folks I had to play some phone tag with, but the folks I talked to, even those who pointed out that this is not going to be easy, and it's not. I echo the comments of some of the senators I talked to. This is not easy. This is not something people relish. But again, this is not a yes or no proposition. This is a yes, we make these reasonable, modest changes, or the alternative is layoffs. And to the extent of senators I've had a chance to contact and other members of the Assembly as well who had concerns, they to a person have said to me, I'd much rather make these sorts of modest changes than lay thousands upon thousands of state and local government employees off.
Why would you have to lay off anyone? You get $165 million in savings by refinancing state debt. You said the gap is something like $136 million. So why would there need to be anyone laid off?
Well, for us, we've got the debt restructuring, but we have a combination of things. In the budget that we're in, not only are the furloughs a layover from Governor Doyle in the past legislature, but you look at monies appropriated for Medicaid, appropriated for the Public Defender's Office, and appropriated for correction. And the actual amounts of those expenses far exceed what was appropriated. On top of that, you had a payment that was not made in December of 2010 by my predecessor, which leaves a balance of about $58.7 million that we owe to the state of Minnesota, and that adds interest every day. That amount we account for in the budget repair bill, and we also look ahead to the fact that we've had Secretary Hipsch meeting with folks regarding the Patient Compensation Fund, but we wanted to leave an additional balance beyond our statutory balance, which is why there's roughly $42 million left there, so that as we work out a negotiated settlement on repaying the $200 million owed to the Patient Compensation Fund, there were some tools to do that now in the remainder of fiscal year 11, as well as in the next couple of years. The other part, Jessica, is simply this. As we look to make an account for all those changes, for us to be including something, the $30 million we have in this budget repair bill, for something we're already going to include in the 2012 and 2013 fiscal year budgets come next Tuesday, to us only made sense. If you're going to do it, why not move it up a couple months so that you can reduce the impact in terms of having to cut other services or put off other layoffs, avoid that, and instead start making these changes sooner rather than waiting for July 1st.
One of the union workers I talked to, they said, look, we would be happy to give back on the pension and the health care contributions, but the bargaining rights piece of it is what they dislike.
Right.
Would you be willing to strike a compromise since those don't have a direct budget or fiscal impact?
No, and the reason is simple. We cannot guarantee that this budget will be balanced if we wait through the normal collective bargaining process. Over the past decade, the average length of time for negotiated settlement has been 15 months. In fact, in the contracts that were brought up in December, it was 18 months after their contract was up. It was interesting. At that point, they didn't want to wait to negotiate with me. They wanted to ram it through after the election, but before I took office. Now suddenly they want to negotiate. I think the facts are, the time has shown us that that doesn't work. We cannot pass a budget on a hope and a prayer. We have to know exactly what we're dealing with. More important, though, than state government is when I have school districts and city councils and counties across the state, I cannot look at the possibility of reduced state aid for those local governments and be able to say, unlike New York and California and others where they've cut billions of dollars from from the state to school districts and local governments and the university system there without any tools, they just cut them outright. So there'll be layoffs and mass program reductions and that. Our goal along has been to give those local governments the tools they need to offset the reduction of state aids that they'll get throughout this budget process. I can't guarantee that out of the more than 1,000 different jurisdictions that they'll all be able to successfully collectively bargain for that. I need to give them the absolute certainty statewide that all of them will be able to have that option and those tools.
Governor, what do you give them those tools if you remove pension and health care from bargainable items and leave everything else? Because those are the only things that are having a fiscal impact. So just remove those as a kind
No, as a former local official, I got to tell you, those are the biggest pieces. But the other elements, other than the base pay, and we still have collective bargaining when it comes to base pay, although we still put that on a range up to the CPI so that you truly have the ability for the community's ability to pay to be factored in. The CPI's stuck right now, so you wouldn't have a pay increase in a year or two as the things we've done to help the private sector stimulate the economy get up and going, and you start seeing 3-4% or more growth in the economy. Then those jurisdictions could offer up to 3-4% growth in terms of pay. But there are other factors that directly attribute to the higher costs, and I know it well. Having been a county executive, it's true even more so at the school board district or the school district level, where benefits are the driving costs, but other factors certainly have an impact. And again, to the extent that everything that's taken out of the hands of those local governments and school districts means the potential that they're not able to offset state aid cuts.
One more question. Yesterday, the AFL-CIO announced in their ad campaign, so this is a war on unions essentially. If you look at the proposal, some of the points are stuff like no longer collecting union dues because that cuts off money that we ask and ask me that then run ads that attack Republicans and you. So basically, you can neuter the unions along with doing all these things. I mean, are you basically politically negating public employee unions in Wisconsin?
No, bottom line is they still have collective bargaining rights for the base pay. And in terms of what we're doing is eliminating the requirement that governments at the state and local level have to collect dues for the Public Employees Union. And we're giving every worker at the public, in the public sector at the state and local level the ability to choose whether he or she wants to be involved in the union. That's free choice. That's the American way. It's true democracy. If employees choose not to be in, that's their right. They're not forced to under state statute. The bottom line, though, is as we're making these changes and asking our employees to pay more of a contribution, a reasonable, modest contribution, but a contribution nonetheless, allowing them the option to not be forced to be in a union and not to have union dues automatically deducted from their payroll, gives many of them $500, $600 or more that they can use to offset those higher costs. So from a worker standpoint, it's a benefit. They're not forced to take this if they don't want to contribute to it, and they can use that to offset the higher costs. Thanks.